Hi, my name is Monica Schneider. I am a professor in the psychology department. I'm going to be providing you with a little bit of background about working memory and long-term memory. Students often don't realize that we actually have different types of memory. They do different things with information. They serve different functions. There are different strategies that will help us effectively keep different types of memory. This difference between working memory and long-term memory is particularly important because most of us have been trained to work really effectively in working memory, whether it be in school when we were taught and the study strategies that we use in the class and on tests and to problem solve. Often we've used working memory. They feel more natural to us, even though long-term memory structures are really the way we want to go, right? There's a difference between wanting to keep things short-term and being able to process them at a given time and wanting to keep information for a month, a year, multiple years. We're building on previous knowledge, right? So that we can really be really effective professionals. All right, so let's get started. As you can see, I provided an outline trying to just give you a visual representation of where we're headed. First, we're going to be talking about working memory, tell you a little bit about what it is, right, and how you know you're working in working memory, and also the kind of characteristics and how it likes to function and the limitations surrounding working memory, why we don't want to stay there even though we often do work in that sphere. We're also going to talk a little bit about, well, what kind of strategies are designed to keep things in working memory. They are strategies that are effective for keeping things in working memory. The only thing is we don't necessarily want to stay there, right? We want to actually be functioning in long-term memory. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, right? That what long-term memory is. You'll see that it's a very different kind of processing that long-term memory wants. If we want to actually keep things and make it usable and build on previous knowledge, we're going to have to use what's called parallel distributive processing, which is very different than what many of us use when we are learning and trying to study and apply things. And then we're going to talk about strategies related to that. So elaborative rehearsal, right? What kind of strategies are actually going to help us get things into long-term memory and make them effective, right? So that we are really streamlined, effective information processors. So my goal for you is that to actually learn how to maximize using both working memory and long-term memory to your advantage, right? So that you are the most effective, streamlined information processor. All right, so let's get started. As you can see, right, we're going to start out with working memory. So when I think about working memory, or when I try to explain what working memory is, the way I want you to think about it is the information that you currently have access to right now. So in other words, what you are processing or thinking about and are consciously attending to or addressing, that's working memory, right? So right now, as you're trying to pay attention to this film, right, you're using working memory capacity. You're like, wait a minute, what is she saying? Does she really make any sense, right? But as you're also thinking about, oh, there's a fly on the wall, or wait a minute, that fight that you had with your roommate this morning, or the blind date that you may be having this afternoon, right? As soon as you're thinking about those things, you're also allocating working memory. So anything that has your attention, that you are currently thinking about, processing at this given moment in time, that's working memory. So when you are trying to solve a problem, when you are taking a test, when you are making decisions, when you are thinking about, like I said, things that are going to happen in the future, or remembering memories of the past, or when you are trying to make sense of what it is you're reading or hearing, right? All of that is working memory, which again, super useful, right? We're going to need that. But here's the thing about some of the ways that working memory functions and what it likes, right? And what kind of information it responds and the strategies that are effective at keeping things in working memory. All right, so first of all, one thing you need to know about working memory is that it is limited in capacity. This is super important. Why? There is only a finite amount of information that you can process at any given time. Even those of you that swear you are great, right, multitaskers, where you could be listening to the radio or having a conversation while trying to also study and problem solve for a homework or an exam or in class, right? While you feel you're really good at it, the research actually shows humans are limited in capacity and in duration of working memory, and those limitations are pretty consistent across people. So even those of you that are like, oh, I'm really effective at this, right, kind of multitasking, you'll really have the same limitations as other people who don't necessarily think of that about themselves as multitaskers. So the problem is if there's a finite amount of information that I can process at any given time, my ability to make effective use of those finite resources is going to make me a much better effective information processor. So how does this translate to being a tutor, right, or being a student? Well, if I'm trying to teach someone and I'm noticing that while they're solving the problem, they get easily distracted or they're upset, right, because emotions and feelings and other thoughts, right, interfere and are part of working memory processing, then you may want to either redirect, take a break, ask them, right, about either what's going on or what, and then be able to then later allocate those resources, right, until they're ready to pay attention to what's going on. All right, so that's the one thing, right? How you make decisions and how you help the people that you're tutoring to make effective decisions of those limited conscious resources, super helpful. And the fact that they should know they actually are limited that way. Another one is that our working memory capacity is limited in duration. In other words, if you don't do something with the information you are hearing or processing or reading or trying to pay attention to, right? If you don't do something with it, it will actually flee working memory in about 18 to 20 seconds. I've seen some researchers find that it can be as high as 30 seconds, but no more than that. Okay, so in English, what does this mean? What this means is that if you're right now listening to this video, but what you're doing is nodding your head going, yeah, that makes sense, but you're not doing anything to try to keep it, think about it more, or do something with this information, or take notes or anything, that as soon as we go on to the next issue, or as soon as you notice the fly on the wall, or as soon as you're thinking about your blind date that you have coming on this afternoon, automatically that information, poof, will go away. Okay? So that means we can't just be listening to people, listening to a video, being in class going, yeah, that makes sense. We're going to have to do things to address that, right? These are going to be strategies that are going to be designed to keep information in working memory, though that's called maintenance rehearsal. Now, in order to understand the kinds of strategies that are going to help keeping things in working memory, you need to know a little bit more about working memory and what it likes. First of all, working memory loves sequence. This is why, for many of you, getting a set of index cards, or when you study, or when you think about things, when you read your notes, you start out chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, or index card 1, index card 2, index card 3, index card 4, right? And it's read, repeat, read, repeat. The reason why that feels so natural is you've been trained to do that as an undergrad, and working memory actually loves it. And so when you do it, it feels right. It feels like you're keeping stuff. It feels like you're working in memory, right? And so you're going to want to keep doing it. Another thing working memory loves is repetition. Repetition. In English, right, it's read, repeat, read, repeat, read, repeat. And as long as you keep repeating the information, you're like, hey, and the more you can cover and repeat without looking, the more you're like, I'm learning this, right? I'm actually making progress. And the reason why that strategy of index cards or notes and covering the notes and testing yourself that way feels so natural and good is that it does actually work in keeping things in working memory. But here's the thing. These strategies, index cards, isolated bullets, PowerPoint slides that you cover and memorize, notes that you write over and over and over again, or sentences that you copy from a textbook over and over again onto huge gobs of notes. Those strategies are all what we call maintenance rehearsal strategies. They're effective to some degree at keeping things in working memory. The problem with that, right, is when you engage in strategies to keep working memory, you're actually telling your brain, look, I only want you to keep this short term. So here's what you'll find will happen, right, with that information. Let's say you're studying for the night before the exam, right? So what happens? You begin. You open up your notes, you take your index cards, you take your study guide notes, or you open up your textbook, and you begin. read, cover, read, repeat, read, repeat, read, repeat. And as long as you're able to repeat some of the information, right, and you go in sequence, you're feeling really good. So you read, repeat, maybe you sleep a little bit for a couple of hours and you get up in the morning and you read, repeat, read, repeat. Many of us, because we've been having a lot of practice with this, will often be able to read, repeat until you get to the exam, right? And then what ends up happening is you read, repeat, you answer the questions on the exam. Now, if your exam is going to ask you to do more than regurgitate this information, these strategies are actually not going to help you on the test. But let's say you're taking a test, right, and it's just asking you to regurgitate stuff that you've been memorizing. Then what happens? You use that information, you answer the questions. So some students do really well in school by doing read, repeat. But here's what happens, and I bet you've experienced this, that as soon as you're done taking the exam, solving the problem, writing the paper, right? As soon as you're done, you can literally feel the information floating away. That's something that we all experience. And what that is that's literally your neurons dumping those connections, dumping that information. And the reason why it's dumping it is your brain is actually trying to help you out. When you engage in read, repeat, and sequence, it's like telling your brain, look, I want to operate in working memory. And so what your brain will say is, okay, I'll help you out. As soon as you use this information that you are keeping in working memory, we're going to dump it so that we leave room for new information coming in. That's great if all you want to do is regurgitate and get through tests maybe, right? And have information very short term. It's not going to be effective for anything where you're learning stuff that you're going to need to build new information with this stuff, where you're going to have to integrate it with other things, and especially where you're going to have to apply it, right? When you as a professional are going to have to actually use these information to make diagnoses or solve mathematical problems or educate other people, right? And so if any of your goals are related to keeping information more than just dumping it and getting rid of it, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get information into here, long-term memory. And unfortunately, the strategies that do this are not the strategies that are going to help you here. And so it's going to be really important for you to understand what this is, how it functions, and what strategies are actually going to help you get things into long-term memory. Okay, so let's talk about that. If this is working memory functioning, then what is long-term memory functioning? Well, long-term memory function, first of all, where working memory loves sequence and repetition and is limited in capacity and duration, long-term memory actually works in terms of what's called parallel distributed processing, which is very different than sequence and repetition. Okay, so in English, right, what is parallel distributed processing? What happens in PDP, right, is that the access of one node, and I want to be clear about this, that could be a name of an author or a theorist, a theory, a concept you've been learning in a class, right? Dates that you're learning, what we call episodic memories or memories that you have, right, about your own life. Once you access any node, right, or information or concept, what will automatically happen in your neural networks is it will activate all of the information that you have ever associated with this information or this node in a parallel fashion. In English, what ends up happening is as soon as you're thinking about dealing with, addressing a concept or theory, anything that you have linked to that node automatically gets activated at the same time. In other words, what happens in your brain is it wants to be able to be very functional. So when you have a concept that you need to use, it's going to help you out by giving you all the connections or directions you could possibly go with this information, right? In English, what this means is that your long-term memory structures, your cerebral cortex, wants to create networks of connected information. And then it wants to use those networks to serve as foundation to build new information. So in other words, we're not dealing with sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're not dealing with regurgitation of information, right? Read, repeat, read, repeat. What it is networks of information that help understand connections between information and therefore use those connections to apply, right? Use for application purposes, to build on, right? And build new knowledge onto that. And so any strategies we're going to engage in is going to have to try to work in creating information this way rather than sequence, read, repeat, and read, repeat. That is called elaborative rehearsal. Elaborative rehearsal is very different from maintenance rehearsal. First of all, it's going to have to be in depth. In English, you're going to have to do something with this information, or if you're a tutor, you're going to have to require that the students that you're working with do something more than just listen to you or read it somewhere and then write it down or repeat it. They're going to have to engage in what's called in-depth processing. How do we do that? Well, there are a variety of different strategies that are going to help because your brain is going to use and want information in this way. First of all, selective attention. One thing you're going to want to make sure when working with your students, right, is that when they're listening to, processing, dealing with information, that they're actually allocating resources to it, right? So in other words, if what they're doing is you're giving them answers or you're regurgitating from a textbook and they're basically just copying down what you're saying, they're not engaging in selective attention, where their resources are allocated to processing and making sense of the information. So if you notice that the students aren't doing that, you're going to want to engage in strategies that require them to not only pay attention, but to use their resources to try to make sense of the information. Second thing, really important, if PDP needs and requires and wants to figure out how things fit with other things, anytime a student or you are teaching a student something or a student is processing information, the first thing a student should always be doing is putting it into context. Knowing where that piece of information that you're going to explain or the information they're going to read or think about, how it fits in with things that they already know or the much larger picture. So you notice I wrote an outline here. And then not only have I been referring to the outline, but I've been actually able to show you using the outline which pieces belong with which other pieces. So the hope is that you have a network of working memory issues, right, being developed and a network of long-term memory issues, and that there are actually going to be connections between the network for working memories and the network things that you're developing in long-term memory. This strategy is a great example of putting it in context. The way that I do this with my students, if I'm working with a student one-on-one or in the classroom, is before we even get to explaining a concept or solving a problem, the first thing I always require my students to do is to think, where are we in the big picture? Are we talking about cognitions and thoughts, emotions and feelings? Are we talking about relationships, right, in psych? Are we dealing with historical context, right? If we're writing a paper, are we in the introduction where we're trying to set things up, or are we dealing with the research articles and making a case for a particular issue, right? So once you have the student articulate, okay, so this is what it's about or where I am in the big picture, then we can start to deal with the details. Now, in dealing with the details, manipulation of information is really important. In English, what the heck does that mean? Regurgitation and repeat is very surface level, right? In other words, whatever I hear, I write down, or whatever you say, I try to memorize, or I use those same words. Instead, what you're going to want is to require your students, if you're a tutor, right, to manipulate the information in English, to one, convert it into English, to be able to take what you're saying or right, and translate it into their own words. Not only that, but rather than giving people an answer, right, when you're working with them, actually asking them guiding questions so that they can use what they know and figure out and try to articulate the answer. The more they chew on it, think about it, process it more deeply, use multiple modes in thinking about it, and are forced to explain or figure it out, right, with your guidance and help, the more likely they are working in long-term memory rather than working memory. The more you give people answers, give them fill in the blanks, or you get to the point where what you're doing is providing definitions, right, and they're regurgitating or writing down what people are saying, they're working in working memory. Okay, So that's manipulation of information, multimodal. Now, working memory actually has a lot of different processes that works in different what's called modalities. Visual, spatial, phonological or verbal, examples, using what we call episodic memories or examples from people's lives, kinesthetic, actually having to write the information down. So, as a tutor, when you're working with your students, requiring them and teaching them in ways that are multimodal, super helpful. So I've been doing that, right? I've been providing not only a visual context of where we are, but I've been also drawing out and writing out visual representation of what we know. I've been explaining it in English, and I've been trying to provide examples throughout. Okay, now kinesthetic is the last one. Not only am I writing it and creating it, but I would encourage you as students to also be writing and creating your own notes. So if you have not been doing that at all during this tape, you have not been actually working in long-term memory, and you won't have usable information once this video is finished. If you have, in contrast, you've actually been writing down the outline, organizing your notes according to the outline, putting things into your own words, drawing things out. Now you're using multimodal. The last thing is self-referent learning. In English, self-referent learning is being able to apply examples from your own life and develop examples that are meaningful to you when you're working with information. So it's one thing to hear my explanation of what working memory is. It's another thing for you then to explain it, let's say, to your students in English, what it is, and to provide lots of examples of what working memory function is like and how one knows that someone is working in working memory function, right? If your student can do that, then you're helping them engage in self-referent learning. Okay, actually, researchers have found self-referent learning to be one of the most effective ways in which to encode information, process it into long-term memory, and keep it. Because one of the nodes that you're connecting it to are what are called episodic memories, aspects of their life and things that mean things to them. And you're connecting new information to those memories and those ways of thinking, which again helps build knowledge. All right. So that's long-term memory, right? And long-term memory, right, we're going to use PDP and these encoding and elaborative rehearsal strategies. The last thing we need to know is the links between long-term memory and working memory, because they actually work together. And if you know how they work together and you help a student use both of them to most effectively, then they are really effective information processors. So, like I said, we have elaborative rehearsal going in, but we're also going to have to find stuff in long-term memory and bring it back into working memory so that the person can solve problems. This is called retrieval. So the trick to working memory and long-term memory is to know how to encode or put things effectively into long-term memory in ways that are easy to find, and then the person can then pull them out or retrieve them into working memory to answer problems. So if you're working with a student, the student is going to be reading the problem they're trying to solve. That is working memory. So they're going to read the problem, and then they're going to have to go into long-term memory to find, what do I know? What did my professor say? What did I read about in a textbook about that information? They're going to have to find that information, bring it back into working memory, and working memory is going to help them think through the problem, use it, and apply it to solve the problem. So the thinker and the solver and the decision maker is working memory, but the goal is to have stuff in long-term memory that can be easily found, retrieved, and usable in working memory. Okay, so there are a couple rules about this. The nature, the number of arrows, and the nature of the arrows going in totally affect the number and the nature of the arrows going out. In English, if all I do is read, repeat, which a lot of you do when you're studying, or a lot of your students that you're working with are going to use when they're trying to learn, right? Then the only arrow you have going in is a definition and someone else's words, right? So the only thing that they will have coming out, maybe, is the definition and someone else's words. And when all you have is a definition or someone else's words that do not make sense to you, the only thing you can do is regurgitate, repeat, and give the information as you know it. But if you're using all of these strategies, multiple modes. It makes sense of them in English. They've manipulated, drawn it out, thought about it, connected it to their own lives with self-referent learning. That is like 20 arrows going in. What that means is that when the person needs the information, when they pull it out, all the network is going to come out, right? So now this whole network serves as one chunk rather than individual separate pieces of information. Now that means more information is coming to working memory. It means different types of information are coming to working memory. And now when that person has to solve a problem, they're going to have access to a lot more information and more usable information when they're trying to solve the problem. Okay, so I tell students, when you're taking a test or solving a problem or giving a speech like I'm doing right now, and your arousal is high and you don't have a lot of resources, what you want is you want to know that stuff so well that when you pull it in from long-term memory to working memory, it already has all the pieces available. So all you have to then do is connect it rather than think about it, try to make sense of it while it's in working memory. It is one of the major keys to making sure you have working and long-term memory functioning as effective as possible. I hope this has been really helpful. It's just the beginning, right? Background information. I have a lot of strategies to give you. I also would be happy to talk with you or your students about studying strategies or any questions that you have about the material. My name again is Monica Schneider. I'm in Bailey 140. I'm in the psych department, and my email is schneid, SCHNEID, @geneseo.edu. I also teach Psych 100 if you want to learn more about not only memory, but emotions and how your brain works and relationships and other things. So I would love it if you joined me in Psych 100. I hope this has been useful. Like I said, we've just touched the surface of what we know, but please feel free to contact me with any questions or concerns. Take care and thank you.